Hi everyone, I'm Devin, your friendly neighborhood board gamer, and this is Devin Talks Tabletop, the YouTube channel where the games are made up, what I say doesn't matter, and let's go ahead and introduce our guests. This is the first multi-recorded interview that I've done on the channel, and I'm excited about it. I'm happy to bring back Jay, who I have known over the last couple of years, especially with the advent of off-the-page games and the release of Mind Management, which is one of my favorite titles of 2021. So, in honor of that fantastic relationship with Jay, he has agreed to talk to me once again, and he has brought with him his co-designer, Shad Miller, and then also the illustrator and artist, Tyler Crook, who is responsible for the graphic novel Harrow County, and as Off the Page Games has been introducing with its line of games, also the artist of the board game. And so I'm very excited to talk to these three today, and I've kind of compiled some questions that are hopefully going to bring me in the background and bring these three gentlemen into the foreground so that they can talk about their game. Let's jump into things. Jay, Tyler, Shad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I do want to say that Cullen Bunn, the writer of Harrow County, wanted to be here, but I think, is flying, or he's just not able to come to this interview. So he would have loved to have been here, and he's the writer of the comic and graphic novel series.
And I would have loved to have had him. It would have made my line of questions even longer, but let's go ahead and jump into it. So, Jay, you and I have history together with Mind Management. I've covered that game. I love that game. It's one of my favorites. So I guess I have to ask, why Harrow County? What about the graphic novel or the game design led you in this direction where Harrow County would be the next adaptation from Off the Page Games?
Yeah, it's a funny story. So Shad and I, a long time ago, before Mind Management, while we were designing Mind Management, Shad and I concurrently we're designing this other game that we called Skirmishes. And we were pitching it around, and it was getting a couple nibbles from publishers, but nothing serious. And then Mind Management becomes a hit, and I'm trying to think what could be my next game, and I had nothing lined up, and I'm like, I love Skirmishes, but what could I do with it? And I actually went to a comic creator named Chris Schweitzer. I just really like his art style and everything, and I kind of pitched him the game and said, I know you don't have any comics that fit with this at all, but maybe, I don't know, like, would you be interested in like writing a story, a whole new comic, and then we kind of release at the same time? It's like, I'm just grasping at straws. And he goes, oh, that'd be cool, man, but I'm booked solid I'm 6 books deep. And he said, I think this could fit in Harrow County universe. I'm like, oh, and I hadn't read it yet. And so I, went and got them all, read them, devoured them. It's an appropriate verb, I think. And set up a meeting with Tyler and Cullen. And I pitched them what Skirmishes, which at the time was quite symmetrical of a game. It was 1v1, but it was very symmetrical.
Oh, that's
but
interesting. So it's changed.
Even with that concept of what it was, they both said yes, the fools at the time. But it changed, and from that moment on, we just had to then absolutely change it, and we had to identify like what makes Harrow County, and how do we put that in game form. And it was that's where it started becoming more and more and more asymmetric, because the factions in the comic just have different purposes and goals.
That's super cool. Super cool. Okay, that excites me. I'm going to jump from that straight into talking a little bit more about design. Shad, I have a question for you. Yeah. Did the mechanics of the game and the story of the graphic novel, did they line up in ways that you didn't necessarily expect or account for going in?
I love that question. I mean, I think one of the things that is a big part of the story of the game of Harrow County for me and Jay is, as soon as we started reading and devouring the comics and going back over them again to make sure we were getting all right, all these mechanics just started falling in place that we, maybe there had been a decision point about, well, is it more important that there's, that they do something on one particular spot, or that there's another character? Oh, we definitely need another character because we need Priscilla, or we need, one of the other characters represented. And I think it's also interesting because in the origin of in the story Jay was telling, one of the first things that matched was how we spawn units. It's much like, resurrecting something from the dead. So that was immediately a hook. And after that, it was just like over and over again. If we had to make a decision about a mechanic, it was clear because of Harrow County. And then so many of the mechanics that ended up being vital to being fun, or like, like when I think about one of my favorite things is the cube tower in the tree that's hidden in the box. Love
Yeah.
that. Everybody at Gen Con was super excited. It was super fun to watch people get excited about it. And that came from, we wanted the tree to be a super vital part. We wanted really dramatic, moments of combat where surprising things happen, and it kind of met with that kind of thing. And also the really awesome way that Tyler will like hide Harrow County in the background in the comic. We wanted that kind of thing in there. So we had the tree hidden in the box, and it was really awesome. And it actually really affected my design philosophy, because a lot of times I want to white box things and I want to have things devoid of theme until later. And now after doing Harrow County with Jay and with Tyler and Cullen, it's, I want that hook so that I understand, because the mechanic is really the metaphor for what you're trying to create.
Instead of coming at design forward and then theme later, now you're trying to find ways in which they're integrated from the beginning.
Yeah, much more often. And I do a little bit of writing myself, so it was always kind of a hard thing for me to try to take the theme away early. But now I'm so happy that it changed, because this is much more fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, Tyler, going to bring you into the conversation. You've been patiently waiting. How does it feel having the opportunity to introduce the world of Harrow County to a new audience in a different medium?
It's very, it's really fun, because it's like, it allows me a chance to sort of approach the story of Harrow County and the world of Harrow County from a completely different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of thinking about, these guys are amazing at finding ways to integrate the story into the gameplay. And it's always really fun to sit on a call with them and be like, there was that one episode with that guy, and like to find that, give them like, find a way to integrate the two things even better and keep the themes going. That stuff is really fun. And, mostly it just is, it's a way for me to rediscover the work. Because especially after I was drawing that comic for about 3.5 years full time. And it's really, you get really locked into your own sort of view of it and your own perspective of it. And it's been really fun to sort of take that step back and sort of re-examine it a little bit.
Cool. And then follow-up question to that. What opportunities and or challenges did you experience creating art for a board game instead of a graphic novel?
I guess I don't know, they're very different and very similar. I guess the big challenge, like the nice thing about doing a graphic novel is you're drawing a thing, you have the first panel and then it leads to the second panel, it leads to the third, and on and on. And when you're working on a board game, it's like, here's these 50 pieces. They're all Harrow County, but like they don't relate to each other in the same way like a comic book page does. So it's like, you have to, after you finish a piece, you have to like reset your brain and be like, okay, what is this next piece? How exactly does it work? And there's always a lot of, there's been a lot of sort of problem solving around like, okay, we need this piece to function in a very specific way. How does the art, work? Like there's one part of the game that uses a little dial as a counter, and we have it as a wooden spoon with a hole in it, and like that sort of thing wasn't immediately obvious when we got started on it. We had to figure out how that worked.
That's fair.
And
that's fair.
So
and
like that's
it's
the
like
big difference.
They're connected to each other in a larger sense, but they're not as like linearly following each other as when you're going from panel to panel.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's interesting. I didn't even think about that.
And I guess the other thing too is that the art, like the art on the comic, you can think of as being very sort of passive. It exists on a page, and the page is well defined. It hasn't changed sizes in years. And but every single piece of the game has to be like industrial designed. You know what I mean? It has to exist in real life in a way that the comic doesn't have to.
Cool.
If that makes any sense.
No, yeah, it makes sense. It's interesting because I hadn't thought about that idea of how like the art has like anchors before it and after it if you're doing it in the graphic novel, but then they have to exist independently in a board game, like as a component. So that's kind of interesting to me. Okay, so Jay, jumping back to you, what is your favorite design aspect of Harrow County that calls to or relates to the story?
like it's 100%. It's got to be the tree, right? So what's kind of funny about this game is that this is actually the first game I've ever designed. I've designed like 20 odd games or so that has combat. I've never designed a combat game, and so it meant that we had to do a lot of learning. Like we had to go through all the learnings of every that anybody's designed a comic game has already gone through, because I haven't learned any of it yet. As much as I have design experience, I don't have any of that experience. And so we started with a very deterministic battle resolution, like chess, where you move onto this piece and that piece is dead. And it felt like it really lacked a lot of emotion, like, whoa, kind of, because it's just very deterministic. So then, of course, we added dice, and we used dice in so many different ways, because there's so many different ways you use dice to resolve combat. But we always found it too swingy and too much like, I got 2 ones, it sucks. And then when we came across the concept of, what about a dice tower? A cube tower, very different than a dice tower. For those that don't know, a dice tower, all the dice go through and it just helps roll them and keep them contained. A cube tower has different ledges and holes within it, so some cubes stay in the tower and some come out. And for a randomizer for combat was awesome, because it's a self-balancing mechanism. So that in itself was just great, and how we did that, how it's used for combat is so wonderful. But the fact that we said, well, it's a cube tower, what could it be? Immediately it's like, it's a tree. And as I'm trying to figure out how to design a 3-dimensional tree or something that's going to sit out separately, I'm like, could it possibly fit in the box? Because there's probably going to be a tree on the cover, is my thought. So can that be? And lo and behold, yeah, we were able to, get this cube tower. You literally, the box has a hole in the top, the box has a hole in the front, and you drop the cubes, and it's so cool.
It is also
so cool.
Like, I, as a game player but also a content creator, if I'm ever taking a photo of a game, or sometimes when I'm playing a game with just 1 or 2 people, I like to try and have the box the box art physically on the table. And so like the idea that it naturally has to be there because you're actually using the box as a component in the game is a cool way to like play to my weird sensibilities and desires as a gamer. Is like, cool, there we go, fade in, fade out. But to have that in the gameplay itself is is a really cool way to see that, for sure. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, if I'm allowed a second one, because it's so cool, because it's almost tied, is that in the comic, Hester is trying to come back to life. She's this witch that was buried under this tree. This tree is very vital to the story of Harrow County. And we wanted to include Hester in the game. And one of the things she does in the comic is she infects people and hates with snakes. And the snakes go in the ears of these people and it infects them. And we're like, wow, that's cool. And so we have these little plastic miniatures. And when Hester infects them, you put little snakes, actual plastic snakes, into the ears of these little miniatures, and they walk around with snakes sticking out of their ears, and it's so cool.
Like a much larger version of Wrath of Khan. It's just like the earworms, but just horribly large snakes. Though I think my wife would do much worse with the snakes than the earworms. But okay, so Shad, he may have touched on 1 or 2 of the things you would have said, but same question to you. What's like one of your favorite design aspects where Harrow County has come into the game?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that, because I really wanted to jump in and add, so, and I just want to say about the tree. One of the reasons I really like it too is there's a sense in Harrow County for me of like this building dread, this building power. Emmy is learning about this really deep history she has. So the tree, the fact that the cube tower is gathering up this possible storm of, destruction was a really neat aspect to me. And I got to see it play out at Gen Con in a really fun way, because the tree was eating a lot of cubes. And then in the last 2 combat rounds, all of them came out, which was crazy. So, and it just felt to me like one of the final battles that you see. I loved the process of coming up with the powers for each character and coming up with how is Malachi so different from Emmy. We wanted them both to have combat related powers because they both were super protective, but Malachi can bring a token, show up on one side of the board that can attack from a different spot. And Emmy is like building a base of power by collecting all the cubes to be able to protect everybody. And that was a really great process to me that what Harrow County, like the comic, the characters feel so unique. So it was very natural. And it also just made reading the comics were great to read. And then every time I read a new character, I thought, oh, this is how they might work in the game. And we'd have a conversation about it. So
that's cool.
And then we'd talk to Tyler to make sure it fit.
Okay. So to all three of you, and we'll start with Tyler, what is one of your favorite characteristics of Harrow County that make it a memorable experience for readers? And this is stepping a little bit away from the game and just going into it as a reading experience, because off the page games exists because of like a love for graphic novels, and I absolutely love graphic novels myself. So what do you feel like is what makes it such a tangible or such a memorable, compelling tale?
I think there's a lot of parts of it. I mean, there's a lot of the game that like the characters tie into the gameplay so well that I think that people who are big fans of the graphic novel, when they see how the character plays on the board, are going to be like, oh, of course that's how Hester plays, or oh, of course this power means that they move on the board this, in this specific way. But I really think that people who read the book are going to lose their minds when they put it the first time they put a snake in a little character's ear. I really think that that's going to be the thing that people talk about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Jay, what about you?
I'd say that kind of like in Mind Management, we had a training mission, and then we had the full game, trying to make sure that there was an accessible way to get into the game. Mm-hmm. We thought about that a lot for this as well, and we decided to break it down into 5 chapters. And so chapter 1 is equivalent to the training mission in Mind Management, where it's kind of like the bare bones experience, but it's still an experience. It's still a good meaty game. For those that have played the training mission in Mind Management, that's still a meaty game that gives you the core concepts of the game. And then you add more in chapter 2, and chapter 3 now becomes for us basically the full game. That's once you play chapter 3, you know all the rules of the game. And chapter 4 introduces a whole new faction called Cammy, who plays in a totally different way, have different objectives. It's super asymmetric. And then chapter 5 is when you bring in a third player to play in this 1 versus 1 game as Hester the Dead Witch.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Okay, and Shad, we'll end with you. How, what is the memorable or compelling aspect of Harrow County that you think is like the most immediate to readers, or maybe to yourself in your own experience?
I think that I have this memory when you asked me this question of sitting with Harrow County and reading it with the soundtrack. And it was like the spookiest, most like wonderful, one of the most wonderful reading experiences I've had. And I think one of the reasons was that Harrow County has this wonderful way of like spreading beyond the page a bit. Mm-hmm. And I think, like it's one, how I would be reading it and then something I would be doing, because it does a wonderful job of mixing sort of every day, even though it's set in a different time period, with the horror that it's getting and the subtlety of it. And, that was something I really wanted to capture. And I sure hope that, people who play the game also sometimes put the soundtrack on, and that'll make me.
I didn't know there was a soundtrack. And now that I know that, I was thinking about, I was reading through some of the first few, volumes or issues earlier today. And so now I want to go back and start over from the beginning with the soundtrack, now that I know that exists.
Cool.
So.
You should ask if anybody here knows who made that soundtrack.
Who made that soundtrack? It just came to me. Me.
Tyler, do you want to answer?
It was
that
me.
One?
It
was
me.
Oh,
that's so cool.
Anybody watching,
cool.
You can stream it on Spotify or Apple iTunes or whatever you want. It's on pretty much everything. If you just look up the Harrow County soundtrack.
Were you fully involved with all? Did you all do all the music production? How did this come about? Yeah, I'm super curious.
That's that. I've done music since I was a teenager, and it's just recording and stuff has been my hobby. So I just started writing it when we were I think it was maybe an issue or 2 into Harrow County, and I was sitting down to noodle with some music, and I was like, I wonder if I could come up with a Harrow County song. And then after a while I had I don't know how many songs. There might be 12 songs.
Oh wow.
Total for the whole
full
thing.
Soundtrack. That's awesome.
Yeah, and they're just sort of instrumental. It's really sort of cinematic, soundtracky stuff. But
okay, well, yeah. I'm sold. I have Spotify, so I will be using that.
Nice.
Okay, this question is for Jay and Shad, and you can tag team it however you want. How effective do you feel the game is in translating the tension of the different story characters as like an asymmetric conflict?
Yeah, Shad, you want to give it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that was definitely a primary goal of us. And I think one of my favorite things about how we decided to handle that, Jay really pushed for. And when you come into the third faction with, well, it's really the fourth faction. When Hester shows up, she doesn't, ruin the balance of the two-player game. And that was one of our big play experiences. But it also has the effect that, Hester is underneath everything, which is exactly, I think that is one of my favorite parts of the adaptation that I don't know. It's not on the surface, but Hester is manipulating things in the background the entire time you're playing with her. And I love that because that was one of my favorite parts of the comic as well.
Cool. Jay?
Yeah. I think the tension for me comes in the fact that we have 3 different ways you can score points. And from all of our demos and people talking about the game so far, like the games always are super close. And so the tension comes to the fact that what do you want to focus on? Which point avenue do you want to focus on to get your points? And you can't ignore this person also is trying to get points this way. Should I spend effort trying to block them from getting points on their thing that I don't care about, but they care about? But I want to get points too. And so the tension becomes in trying to, pull at 3 different threads at the same time, and they're all unraveling. And I find that just that core gameplay loop is very tense.
Yeah, no, I remember. I think it was Gamma. I think we were at Gamma whenever you were walking off with Mark from Board Game Coffee, and you're like, "Hey, we're gonna go play Harrow County. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Yes, please." And then just like I'd had something to drink that night, but even still, I was like, I think if I was sober, my brain would still be at the same place where it's at, where I'm like, I need to go for this, but he's going for this, and neither of us are doing this. But if we did this, could it stop? And it was such a cool like brain puzzle to try to figure out what was going on. And then like the whole time, Jay's on the sidelines and he's giving commentary to both of us and our asymmetric sides. And he's like, but wait, there's a third, there's more. But wait, there's more. So it was so cool to like see that puzzle play out. Yeah, no, and I do think that the asymmetry there really does a good job of letting players decide which avenue they're going to go down. Okay, Tyler, this next question is for you. So before this project, did you have any familiarity with the board game industry? Like, did you know what you were getting into, like, whenever this started?
Absolutely not. No. Like, I did, I made I made a incredibly wrong assumption that it was because I made video games for a long time. I worked at Sony for about 12 years.
Oh, okay, cool.
And did all sorts of stuff, all from all different angles of the game industry. Other than I didn't really program, but I sort of was like, oh, a
just
board game.
Put a
It's
side
like,
note
it's kind
to
of
have
like
a separate interview with you later. So
it's like I kind of had assumed that it would be really similar to video game development because they're both games, but really it is not the same. And in fact, I think hats off to these two because I do not understand how they're able to design these games. They're just so like, it is a razor's edge of mechanics, of like complex mechanics that are every little change affects everything else in huge ways. And yeah, like just seeing how these guys have worked that out has been really sort of eye-opening.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's I know that there's a lot of people who are in the board game industry who I know have history and familiarity with the video game industry, but I haven't ever heard that description of how much the design elements are quite distant or disparate from each other.
Well, I think because so much of video games is like the game balancing is more about balancing the control system to get that to function how people want, and rules are a completely different thing. It's like there's no control system that you have to worry about because you just grab the thing and move the things around with your hands. So like it's just developing these interlocking complex rules and making them actually be fun. That is, like I said, I don't know how it is humanly possible, but these two guys do it.
They do a good job of it, that's for sure. So to all three of you, and we can figure out whatever order we're gonna answer this in. If you could incorporate one character from Harrow County and make them an additional part of the asymmetric conflict, who would it be and why? Essentially, if you could add one character that's not a faction and make them a playable faction,
Oh, I see.
who would it be and why?
I mean, the first response would be the Fair Folk, because that was one of the first Tales of Harrow County miniseries that came after the main Harrow County story was done. They're continuing doing more stories. They just finished wrapping up another one just now. But that's going to actually be an expansion that comes with the game when we launch on Kickstarter. So that already is a faction. But after the latest miniseries, there's something called the City Folk, the City Cousins, and that would be an interesting faction to try to figure out how they would play and integrate into the game.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump on Tyler if he was, or were you gonna say something?
I have an idea. Should I throw it out?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, go for it.
There's a part of Harrow County where a group of hunters come into the local woods to hunt another one of the characters, and they're just like normal guys with no superpowers or anything. And it might be pretty fun to have them as a survival thing where they sort of come in between all these other factions that are warring, and they have to move around and do things without getting killed as their like only goal.
I
think
like
that could be pretty fun.
Tyler, you realize that anything you say out loud, like we have to do it now. Like, it's like,
pretty much.
We had just as like.
If that's true, then I'm going to say out loud that we should have solid gold chunks mailed to me at my house. Just make it cash. Let's just send me cash.
Cash. All right. In the video description, I'll add Tyler Crook's home address.
Send cash. Yeah.
And his PayPal account.
Yeah. But a funny story about that is that while I was thinking up different stretch goals and different things we could add for this game for the Kickstarter, I thought, I wonder if a sleeve would be good. And, sleeves are hit and miss with some people liking or not liking, where you just kind of slide on a sleeve. And I kind of threw the idea at Tyler, like, slide it on. Maybe we could make it look like Emmy's satchel that she wears. And in Emmy's satchel, she carries the skinless boy's skin in her satchel. And so maybe the hand is sticking out of the satchel or something, And so Tyler did a mock-up. You mean like this? And he did like a whole satchel with a lid that closes and a strap.
Yeah.
And I've insulted him.
He's gonna go get it.
Oh, he's going to get it. Okay, good. And I was like, that's ridiculous. He goes, I don't know how much things cost. It just looks cool. And I'm like, it does look cool. The
miniature mock-up.
Yes,
so awesome. That should like a deluxe sleeve for the box. Oh my gosh.
And so because of that idea, there's now a third tier called the Satchel Edition that's going to have that plus some more, which is just super cool.
Thanks for ruining my wallet.
Actually, they've already made a test demo of at the manufacturer where it actually has a cloth strap and you can literally carry it around like the whole game.
That's cool.
And flop it on the table and drop some cubes in the tree.
Yeah, that's crazy.
All right, well, Shad, what is your answer to this question?
This is such a great question and so dangerous. But I do have an answer, and there's a part of the comic that really fascinates me where it's like the wars between the family before the comic ever takes place, and I would love to have something about that at some point. But I think I would want. I would more want to make sure it was matching the vision of that with Tyler and Cullen before we ever did anything with it. And my other answer was definitely like the city folk and stuff, but that's something I would think about because it'd be fun to like invent. I'm going to stop talking because I'll get us. Yeah, that could be fun.
Okay. This next question is once again to all three of you. And it is, what is an enduring message or theme from the graphic novel that you think makes it such a compelling story?
It's a good one.
Yeah, that is.
I think the main since I've been thinking about this for years, like,
I figured it would be natural for you to speak first while they ruminated. So
I really think the main thrust of the story is that is a question of self-determination of, you know, who are you? Are you the person that everyone wants you to be, or are you the person you think you are, or are you some combination of the two? You know, is it nature versus nurture? All those sorts of questions. And we sort of, in the story, we sort of explore that through the character of Emmy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's a huge question of, is she Hester reborn, or is she a new person, or what is she?
Does the circumstances of where she came from define who she will be? Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that's such a cool question.
We don't have to add any more to that.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. No, I mean, it is hard to follow up one of the creators with that question.
Actually, Tyler, I think you're wrong. I think.
Yeah. Well, you laugh, but I love that when people come tell me what my stories are about, and like what Cullen and I have created, because it's always just a little bit different, and
it's great.
You know, it's fun and exciting. I mean, that's hopefully that means it's a little more. You know, that the story is more. I can't think of the word, like
flexible or like interpretable.
Yeah, like just that it will stand on its own.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
I like that stories. I feel like the best stories have a spectrum of interpretation from like what you can get out of it, and like kind of going back to that theme of self-determination, like how do you determine the aspects of a story that speak to you the most, like in which characters are you going to identify with the most, because it may not be the main character, it may not be Emmy, but no, I think that's super interesting. But Jay, this kind of comes back to you and to, I think, some conversations that we've had, but not really an explicit explanation of why comics and graphic novels. Like, why is this medium your primary source for adapting board game designs instead of maybe something else?
So for my entire career as a board game designer, I'd always said, like, oh, I don't want to be a publisher. I don't want all that headache. I just want to do what I'm doing. And then we made Mind Management, and we partnered with Matt Kint, and
who I love. He's awesome. He's
so
such
awesome.
a nice guy.
And we actually signed it. That game got signed with a publisher. We're like, all right, see you later. Tell us when it's ready. And 6 months later, that publisher went under. And so we got the rights back. And at that point, we had a meeting about what to do next. Like, who are we going to pitch this to? We got to start the whole process all over again. Mm-hmm. And Matt Kint was the one who said, like, why don't we just do it ourselves? He goes, I got graphic design background. I'll do the art, and then you publish it. And so I started a publishing company. And then I'm trying to think, well, who am I as a publishing company? What kind of games am I going to publish? And I didn't want to be one of these just generic publishing companies that's like, where your motto is like, we make great games. Like, it's like
fun in a box.
Yeah. I wanted something to hang my hat on. And I kind of took a page from Restoration Games, if you're familiar, where their whole thing is very obvious, even from their name, is that they restore old games and add mechanics and update them and release them like all blinged out and as modern games. And like like everyone knows who they are immediately because of that. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, if I did that, obviously right now I'm doing Mind Management, so maybe I'm going to base all my games just on a whim. I just said they're all based on creator-owned comic books. That's my thing. Mm. And then kind of selfishly, it meant I got to kind of work with all my, comic book heroes and stuff of like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. So I'm, it's a win-win for me. And there have been, it's not to say there haven't been games based on comic books out there, but I don't know if they've partnered so closely with the creators in the past. So this feels like it's a joint effort fully, where it really is like, I don't know, endorse is too small of a word. Like, it's really co-created by everybody, including the creators of the comic. And so it feels like it's really more part of that world as opposed to a game that has some pictures from the comic on it. And the creators of the comic maybe never even saw the game and they just approved some art or something. And that's it.
Well, I think that that co-collaboration that you're talking about and the intense like connection and work together that brings the creators of the comic with you as the designers. I mean, I think that is borne out and shown as how successful it is with, I mean, Mind Management was nominated for the Harvey, right? And it was like the first board game.
It still is.
Sorry. It's currently nominated for the Harvey, but it's the first board game to ever do that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is, to me, an example of how creatively unique and interesting this bridge that you've kind of helped form with Off the Page Games, and how you've brought, people like Matt Kent and Tyler and Cullen and brought them into the game, so to speak, and made really cool games that I think are more so than other titles. Like you mentioned, there are things that are based off of comics, but they don't feel like they're in the same like layer or strata, however you want to describe it.
Yeah,
they don't feel the same to me.
Agreed.
So, okay, Shad, I'm jumping back into a conversation with you and you alone. Get Jay and Tyler out of here. But you have a PhD.
Oh yeah,
totally like fine. So you have a PhD in game design and narrative systems design, and I've done I've done some graduate work in creative writing, and I'm just interested in, because I've thought about going from master's to PhD, but the idea of the game design and narrative systems design that you've done. What are some of the most valuable lessons that you learned from that education that maybe are separate from what you've learned while out in the field and like practically in the industry?
Yeah, that's great. And my day job, I'm actually the lead narrative systems designer for Axon, and I do like VR training as well. So, and I've worked in, like Tyler was talking about, working in the games industry, and he's absolutely right. Like the board game design is so different, and I think really what the lesson that I'm thinking of now that's the most useful for me in making Harrow County and in getting to think about adaptations, and a lot of it, I lean back on some writing from, there are a couple of people. Brenda Romero, she writes about mechanics as the message. So that's like everything I'm trying to do. I'm always trying to make sure, is this mechanic giving the message that, we want from the comic? Is it bringing out that theme of finding your identity, or that history? All these objects have massive amounts of history that you don't know about. That was something that stuck with me from the comic as well. But practically speaking, I think what you guys were talking about earlier, where, that razor thin adding mechanics, I think it really helps me. It helped me think about where the interpretation of the rules comes from in board games. Because for me, one of the most enjoyable things about board games, role-playing games, is that the player is so responsible for bringing that game to life in such an important way. And there are things that I love about computer games, like the insight, like just size that you can do with a computer game. But what you gain with a board game, for me, in expression, is that collaboration with the player, where they're also and they're and it's really wonderful to see that happening. And, Jay, I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but when Jay said that this was a whim, I'm like, yeah, but Jay, everybody who knows you, this is like fate. Like we knew when you said, yes, I'm going to make off the page games, comic book games, creator owned, just like, yeah, Jay, I'm not at all surprised. And I was just like, yeah, that's what the universe wants you to do, man. Awesome. But yeah, the PhD, I was really lucky, and I met a lot of really fascinating people who were just studying super, small parts of board games and digital games. And one of my favorite people that I've written papers with and stuff, he's studying digital adaptations of board games and like how you can't really make a completely, like, the spectrum of how you can do it. And it's been really informative to me about, like, because I always want to put in huge encyclopedic amount of information, but I cut it, and how can you cut it down? So I think board game design is like really intense gardening in a way. And the PhD, it's kind of like picking your PhD topic, because you start with this huge thing you want to do, and if you really want to make a difference in the knowledge, or make a game that captures something from that comic, you're going to specify more and more. So I hope that answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Cool.
Anything that elucidates stuff I don't know, I feel like answers the question. So
Right on.
You all know many things that I don't know.
Yeah.
Tyler, if you could adapt another one of your works to a different medium, board games or otherwise, what would it be and why?
I don't know if this will be a very satisfying answer. I would probably do my current comic project, The Lonesome Hunters.
Okay.
And the reason being is because that's the only other creator-owned book I've worked on. So like,
that's fair.
There's, I think BPRD, I worked on that for a number of years, and there's all sorts of amazing ways that property could be sort of used in different media. But yeah, like the stuff that's always really, really close to my heart is the creator-owned stuff, like Harrow County and The Lonesome Hunters.
Nice. Okay. Got more reading material ahead of me. And then, Tyler, this is another question for you. So you've worked with Mike Mignola on Hellboy. And his description of Harrow County, the graphic novel, is a rare thing, both wonderfully charming and genuinely disturbing. And that's like, on at least my copy of it, that's literally on the front of the cover. And so I was curious because I haven't finished reading through it, and I'm just in the very beginning of it. But how hard is it to walk that line when creating gothic horror, and how well do you think the game translates that mood?
I think for me, it's pretty easy, just because that's sort of like the space where my mind always lives. Is trying to
that's casually terrifying.
Yeah, but I just always love that, and it's the same. It's similar. Like Guillermo del Toro has a lot of that in his work, and even Miyazaki stuff has a lot of that. That sort of terrifying world, but people, enter it with kindness and try to survive in this terrifying world. I really like that. So I think that for doing the comics, I think that was it just came natural. With the game, it's it's interesting because you have the characters in the game doing their thing, and they are asked to behave in character, and yet the player is controlling them, and the player is trying to destroy the other players, which might not be your character's goal. And so I think that's a little bit more difficult of a balancing act to make.
No, that's fair. Yeah, that separation when you get to the fact of the player the player character, rather than the characters in the game.
One of my favorite to go back to video games really briefly, one of my favorite games that tries to tackle this head on is the Metal Gear series, where you play for an hour, and then you get an hour-long cutscene of someone telling you why everything you just did was horrible, and the government is like doing this and it's wrong, and I think So I think Harrow County doesn't go into it it doesn't take that same approach, but there's probably the same conflict there.
Interesting. Jay and Shad, if there is one thing that you could choose to and can successfully, without spoiling anything, tease about the game, what would it be?
Well, I mean,
just looking for tidbits here. Just fishing.
The game launches with 3, we call them legends, so they're your main characters that you control. 3 legends for the protector side, 3 legends for the family side, and 2 goblins for the Cammy side. And if you know the comic, you know that there are more of those characters and legends in this comic. So let's just hope we hit some stretch goals.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I'm good with that. Is there anything, so like I've kind of reached the end of my questions that I've been burning to ask, and now I'm curious, is there anything that has kind of like fallen through the gaps of what I've been asking that you are excited or very eager to share to make sure you divulge something about the game or about the comic that you want people to know?
Well, I've got a question for Tyler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, like, so we just finished up the last miniseries with the City Cousins, and
Mhm.
without spoiler alert, there was some, there was some indication in the ending about like what's going to happen next. And so, are you already talking? Are you? Do you have? Is there plans? Is things signed? Is it guaranteed, or are you just kind of thinking about it? What's happening?
As far as what the next
Yeah,
story arc will be.
yeah.
Well, we're still waiting to see how this last series did, to see
Okay.
if we're going to be able to get more. And that sort of, it ends up being how it works with a lot of comics, where you do the series, you do a story arc, and then you wait to see if it sells, and then then you get approval to do the next story arc.
I
And
see.
you just keep cranking that way. So we're right now we're in a waiting period. We're waiting to see.
I see. I see.
Hopefully
But
we'll
you
know
have,
in the next couple weeks.
but based on the setup, like, do you have like an idea of where it's going already, or do you always?
I do not. Cullen mostly has that. And when the way Cullen and I work together is that basically I just trust him to do the story, and then he trusts the artist. In this case, for the new series, it's
Yeah.
Emily Schnall that's doing the artwork, and we sort of just trust the artist to do their thing. So we take it as I describe it as an improv comedy thing, where you always yes and,
Awesome.
where the writer creates a story and they give it to you, and you look at the story and you go yes and then you do the artwork to try to build on top.
You've done that. You've done that to me many times.
Yeah, it's as a scratch.
Yeah, it's funny. It took me a while to learn that with doing like collaborations on projects like this, where it's like someone will bring you an idea, and it's very often that your very first idea, like thought on that or reaction to that, is like, that's a very terrible, dumb idea. And as soon as I got into this like yes and thing, I was like, wait, here's this idea. I don't quite understand it, but how can I build something on top of it that makes it feel right to me? And like, as soon as I started doing that, a lot of work I was doing started to get a lot better.
That's great.
Nice. That's super cool. Yeah. Shad, what about you? Do you have any burning questions for Tyler that gives us more details about things that we shouldn't know?
Yeah, that's great. That was good. It's hard to follow that. I mean, I think one thing is, I don't know. I'm trying to think of one, but I don't know at the moment. I'm
no
thinking about this. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
No worries.
Cool.
No undue pressure.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, if you guys want to add anything, we can. Other than that, I can tie it off and kind of give us an outro if you're interested. It's up to you guys.
I mean, we probably should blast the date or the whatever.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll do that, and I'll pass that off to you, Jay, and so you can give that spiel, since it's going to be more practiced than you telling me right now.
Sure.
And then so I'll tie us off, pass it off to you, Jay, to do a spiel on how to know more about the game, and then I'll just close us out.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no, it's been a blast.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed every moment of it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and jump us back in without knocking my table over. Well, Jay, Shad, and Tyler, I appreciate it, all three of you, for coming here and subjecting yourself to my random questions. But Jay, before I close this out, I wanted to pass things off to you, to where you could give everybody who's watching and who's listening a little bit more information about how they can access Harrow County, what they need to know. So go ahead and take it over.
So Harrow County, the Game of Gothic Conflict, is going to launch on Kickstarter October 4th, and it'll go until I think the 27th. Which I think October is a great month to launch a Harrow County game for many reasons.
Very much so.
And there's going to be 3 editions: a retail edition, a deluxe edition, and the aforementioned Satchel edition.
Satchel edition, that's where it's at.
The Satchel edition and the deluxe edition are going to come with the Fairfolk expansion packed into the game box itself. So an actual expansion that lets you play up to 4 players.
Awesome.
You can follow along on any of the social media things by following Off the Page Games, whether that's Twitter, Insta, or Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Jay, for bringing this and making this possible. Thank you, Tyler and Shad, for joining in and sharing all about your design with it, your experience creating it. And I'm very much excited for Harrow County. I know that Off the Page Games has given themselves a good foundation of success with mind management, and I can't wait to see how Harrow County does. So thank you to the three of you, and thank you everyone who's been with us. I appreciate all of this. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you.